we're going to talk about is a sensory-friendly environment, and that also includes like your work office, and we're going to talk about home as well, because I know that we have a lot of agents with ADHD or autism too, which is sensory sensitive, and you may have kids, right? If you have ADHD, 50% chance you have a kid with ADHD, or 50% chance your parents have it. Sibling very likely could have it, and so this is a neat thing to understand, because if you're completely overstimulated or you're in an environment that isn't friendly to your sensory needs, it can show up in a lot of different ways that you might not experience. You might have trouble focusing. You might think, man, I can't focus. And it's actually because there's so much stimulation going on, like your chair is uncomfortable, or you can hear someone through the wall talking, or the lights are too bright, or your shoes are too tight or uncomfortable. And we don't realize how this can actually pull away from focus. And so that's why a sensory friendly environment is so important, because it's not just focus more. It's not just, medicine's really helpful, right? And we want to put all these other all these other pieces in place to give you the best chance of focusing the most when you want to. I want to address what's called sensory overload and just talk about that. So our sensory overload is when our sensory system becomes like bombarded with more input than we can effectively process. Like when we're in a restaurant, let's say going to a restaurant. And when we go to a restaurant, immediately we might step into a busy environment. We got the chatter of the people, the dishes are clinking, there's a bunch of different smells going on. You might have to sit and wait. People might be bumping into you on the side. The lights might flicker. There's music playing, right? And so there's actually this influx of all of the sensory data, and it can cause like discomfort or stress. It's overwhelming. There's too much going on. And the reason is with ADHD and especially autism is we take in more sensory input than someone without ADHD, right? So someone else is not going to notice that. And then the other thing is that our brain doesn't necessarily prioritize senses. And so whereas like a neurotypical brain, all of that stuff's going on, and then someone's trying to talk to you, the brain can prioritize and organize and focus on the person talking and drown out the other stuff. Whereas our brain, they've shown in studies, we don't necessarily do that. We kind of pick up all of the sensory input and it gets equal priority level. And so we're trying to focus on this person talking, but we're hearing the dishes clink and we're picking up on the brighter lights, right? And someone just bumped into us and maybe we don't like the sensory stuff. And so when you're with someone, they're like, just focus, or why can't you be present at the restaurant if you're on a date with your spouse or a partner or whatever? It's their brain works differently. They don't understand, right? Because they would say, wow, I must not be a priority because you're not focusing on me. But for us, it doesn't work like that. We might be pulling it in all at once. Trader Joe's, restaurants, leave Sam's Club, Walmart. Yeah, that's Walmart. I wear a hat, I wear sunglasses, and I wear these like noise canceling headphones, depending on the sensory day. And it might fluctuate. Your sensory needs may fluctuate, where some days you might be super sensitive to sensory input, and then other days you might not pick up on it. And that's actually normal for it to ebb and flow, and for some days to be more intense sensory days. Where one day, like I can handle wearing glasses and it doesn't bother me. And another day, it's literally like something's pushing on my head and I can't even work because the sensory input of the glasses is too much. Like my brain can't even filter it out. So it's really interesting. With neurodivergence, right? Your sensory needs or input might be mild, it might be severe, depending on the individual, the environment, how well you slept that night, where your mood's at. And our sensory needs, and we also sensory seeking. So when we're creating a sensory friendly environment, we're going to be using a unique kind of profile for you, the things that calm you down, right? And soften the sensory overload. But we're also going to be having things that are sensory seeking. And that's what a fidget toy is, right? So we want to, in some ways, your profile might be that you want to calm, but you're also stimulating, and it's that perfect ratio. And so it's just fascinating. So that sensory overload can manifest differently in each person. And so let's say we're in that crowded restaurant and you might have heightened sensory, you might feel overwhelmed, and you might get irritable or agitated, right? And then someone else might just shut down and dissociate, and kind of the fawn response, right? Where you don't get irritated and agitated, you're just it seems like you're really calm and kind of quiet. So it just depends on how it shows up. So here are some symptoms or things that might show up if you're having sensory overload, especially in the office, potentially, right? So feeling overwhelmed, anxious, or stressed in like sensory rich environments. You might have more difficulty focusing. Concentrating, maintaining the attention. That's why some people are like, I got to work from home to get stuff done, right? So you might have trouble filtering out the background sensory input. You might feel more overwhelmed, anxious, stressed. So you might get psychosomatic symptoms. You might get headaches. You might start getting a migraine. You might feel really tired. You might have really tense muscles or shoulders. That can happen. Emotion regulation, that can happen as well. So it can be irritability to frustration to drain to overwhelmed, right? Because our brain, we can actually get really fatigued mentally because our brain is actively having to filter out all the sensory stuff that someone else isn't. And so we could get really tired, like mentally tired. And you can think, man, I didn't do anything all day except for go to this training. I just sat here at this training. Why am I tired? Well, you're sitting in the training, right? And your brain is cognitively trying to filter everything out and regulate our emotions when someone's chewing next to you or chewing gum or clicking their pen or they're wiggling their leg and it makes your seat wiggle as well. So you're exhausted at the end of the day because your brain was working constantly to focus, pay attention, right? So we also might withdraw from social interactions, seek solitude. We might do more stimming, repetitive behavior like we talked about last week. It can also, what's interesting is you'd think you'd be tired, right, after the training, but you might also get some insomnia or you might have restless sleep because think of it like us regulating our sensory needs and filtering stuff out. We're consistently regulating our emotions and it's taking brain power for that. It's taking our dopamine, which is like the happy chemical, right? The self-soothing. So it can cause distress that can affect our sleep. So again, you might feel restless, agitated, irritable, more difficulty pulling stuff back. Why am I having a meltdown? Why did I lash out? And it can cause dissociation, foggy, feeling numbed out, right? So it's going to show up for each person differently. A couple things you might notice from a internal perspective, you're going to all of a sudden have a heightened sensitivity to sounds, especially loud or sudden noises that are just typical in a workplace. So this is a graphic I want to use for them, but you can see a heightened sensitivity to sounds. If it's like, man, why am I so sensitive to sounds? This isn't normal. It could be because you've exposed yourself and your brain's at its limit, right? So discomfort in brightly lit fluorescent lights, like offices do that, and it's supposed to, I don't know, keep us awake. Ugh, I can't work in fluorescent lights. Difficulty concentrating in places with multiple stimuli, right? Like if you have an open office or you don't have your own office or that's really paper thin, that's going to be really difficult. Like just avoiding, right? Avoiding crowded places. All of a sudden, you're not going to social events. You're not going out after work. You may not have much of a social life because it's just too much. And then textures or fabrics. So that can actually make like clothing, like this is really soft, right? Like I'm very sensory sensitive, or I have to have certain types of sheets. And then odors. That's something that happen in the office environment as well. So food textures and tastes, making meal prep harder, and then just fatigue. Like that's normal, really common if you just feel tired all the time, right? Like tired all the time, and it might be just the world sometimes. That can happen, but also just our job as real estate agents. We're getting pinged all the time. We got our phone going on, which we're going to talk about. So feeling tired, feeling irritable. Again, we talked about the sensory stuff. Nausea can happen as well. And then just like aversion to even physical touch. So these are all really normal. So we have certain aversion to things. And so one of the most important things, and I'll say this for myself as well, who's, high performer and been in these environments, is acknowledging and validating your sensory limits. So you'd think, and this is the route that a lot of people go, is you ignore the sensory stuff because you don't want to cater to them or be too soft, or you're going to get used to it. I mean, yes, sometimes it's good to expose ourselves, like exposure therapy, and kind of build our tolerance, but not at a baseline. And the first thing that you need to do is you need to get back to baseline, and you do that by acknowledging what your sensory limits are. And so I know that I'm not going to rent a cubicle in an office that's open. There's no way. I'm not going to get work done. I'm also not going to rent an office if there's somebody on the other side that's there talking on the phone all day. I'm going to hear it through the wall. I'm not going to go. Right? I might get it. I might get set up for a week, and I'm just going to stay home because I'm going to resist it. So we want to honor what our sensory limits are. If there's a shirt that's really cool, but I know I can't stand the fabric, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. If there's a social event I really want to go to that's important to somebody, but I'm so spent, I'm at least going to acknowledge this is my limit and I'm going to have like a crash the next day. So I'm going to book that or I'm going to say no, but I get to have a choice versus just running on fumes for my whole life, you know? So we want to acknowledge what those are. And that's an act of self-care, is to understand what your sensory limits are. And then you can actually choose to do things that push you past that, and it's intentional, right? If you say, you know, today I'm feeling strong. I know my sensory limits in Walmart are hard with the lights, but I'm going to leave all my accommodations in the car and I'm going to try it for 30 minutes and see if I can push my sensory limits. And then when I hit, because if I push myself too much, I'll get like panic attacks or dissociate or, so you might experience that. Maybe it's not as extreme for you, but it's much better to know that than think like, what's wrong with me, right? Like, why am I getting migraines? So if acknowledging your sensory limits is important. And what you'll feel a lot of times is you'll feel it coming on. So especially as an adult, and most of us are late diagnosed, you probably learn to suppress that. Very likely that those warning signs, those sirens, you've been stuffing those down most of your life. And so it's going to be kind of weird and uncomfortable to start paying attention to them. And it might even feel like you're babying yourself sometimes, where it's like, but test it, right? Because when you go in an environment, you're going to have, if you listen, sometimes they're quiet, you're going to start getting those messages like, I'm at my limit, or this is too much, or this is really overwhelming. And what you can do, it doesn't mean you leave. It might be that, ooh, let me go outside and calm this down. Let me take a break and then come back in, versus let me be dissociated by the end of this event and now I can't go out for 3 days. Some of those, there's a threshold that once we go past, it's really hard to pull it back. So if you know what your threshold is and you can pull it back before then, and you keep pulling it back before it hits that, then you can stay in the game and just take a few breaks. So that's my recommendation. So when we look at your sensory profile, right? So we all have like a sensory profile, and like certain things may be good or bad, right? Some people love weighted blankets. Those are really helpful. Other people, it feels like you're stuck and you don't like it, right? So we want to explore what our sensory likes are. And that could be lighting, right? We might like dim lights, colorful lights, things that blink, things that don't blink, right? Soft lighting, visual. We might like really just want nothing, like very clean, very simple. Or maybe we like patterns and bright colors, temperature. We might hate being hot, or we might always feel cold and we might hate that, right? We might like a fan on in the breeze, or we might hate the feeling of air on our skin. We might like heated blankets, or we might like to hold an ice pack. Tactile. We might not like touch at all, or we might really like hugs, and we might like to pet a dog or a cat, or we might need, fidget toys with us, right? We might need massages regularly because it helps us keep in our body, or maybe we don't want to be touched at all. And then oral, right? We might do really well with chewing gum, crunchy snacks, soda water, things like that. Sound, we might like a lot of quiet, no background noise, or we might love noise. We might need the radio on or the TV on all the time because it helps, keep us stimulated, or white noise. So everyone's going to have their own profile. And what I mean by that is just paying attention to like what is soothing to you and what is overwhelming, because you're going to have sensory triggers and then you're going to have sensory soothers. So sensory trigger, you probably understand what that is. It impacts our well-being. And it's like when we're most dysregulated, most overloaded. So for example, as my sensory trigger would be sound, like really loud sound, or like, the sound machines they have, but they have the ocean noise where it's kind of the wave, it's on and then it's off, it's on, it's off. I don't like that because my brain goes like that. I want constant, right? So if I'm in a therapy session, like I'm in therapy or something else, I'm going to ask to switch it to something else. But noise is a big one. That's a sensory trigger. Really hard textures, like feeling tight, like glasses on my head, really restrictive clothing, things like that. Those can be sensory triggers. Whereas like a sensory soother for me would be a weighted blanket. It would be like lavender, or like essential oils, or orange, or something like that, and then like removing sound. And having like earplugs or things like that. So you're going to have sensory triggers and you're going to have sensory soothers. And it's a neat thing to just kind of pay attention. If you wanted to, throughout the day, you could have a piece of paper and draw a line down the middle and write sensory triggers, sensory soothers, and just kind of pay attention throughout your day or on your phone and just start jotting down. Ooh, that kind of brought something up in me or got me dysregulated, or, oh, this really calmed me down, turning the lights down really helped. So you're going to just really, as you go throughout your week, pay attention, and you want to build those sensory soothers into your life as much as you can. What I read about was what's called a sensory kit. So it's got all of your soothers, and I want to show you what that looks like. So these are sensory kit ideas. So you could have this with you. You could have it at home. So gum, snacks, toothpicks, and then you've got the auditory, and we'll put this in the newsletter as well, that we send out. But you can see you can have a toolkit with you, and it can be at home or it could be in your car if you get overstimulated. So you could have eye masks, right, for the visual. You could have for temperature, you could have a heating pad, or you can have ice packs, compress, things like that, movement and tactile. So sensory soothers, remember too, it's not always like Zen and taking a bath. Sensory soothers might be movement, right? You might have like I have that chair with a yoga ball on it that you can bounce on a little bit, or like a hammock, or you might have like a plushie, something like this. This is the one that it's like a unicorn that poops. I showed this on our stimming call about fidget toys, but you might have a plushie that's really soft that you like, certain just tactile stuff, that's really helpful. And so, yeah, stress balls, all kinds of stuff. So you're going to, as you start to learn what your soothers are, this is a way to regulate. Because I think a lot of us, and I'm one of those too, in real estate, before I understood this was ADHD, I thought it was just a focus thing. I thought I just had anxiety. Like I thought I was just anxious, that's all. I thought I was anxious. But what was happening is my whole nervous system was reacting to stimulus that was not helping me. And so what might be interesting is if you're in these environments and you start to get anxious, instead of thinking, man, I'm anxious, because you can think your way through, but sometimes when it's sensory related, you can't. And that's what I noticed with mine was, my nervous system got worked up, and then the thoughts followed. So I was trying to address these thoughts, but the core root of it was actually my nervous system. And so instead of trying to think my way through or do affirmations or calm myself down with my thoughts because it wasn't working, I went for systematic, right? I didn't go for my thoughts. I went for my body. And that's when I turned the lights off, put earplugs in, sat on the floor. We call it floor time for neurodivergence. And all of a sudden the thoughts calmed. So the thoughts were basically my nervous system was saying there's a threat. And then my thoughts went crazy trying to protect me. And so if you have anxiety, and you very likely still may have anxiety, it's not uncommon, but some of it or a lot of it could be sensory stuff. You never know. And so it might be good to play with it and adjust and address it as systematic versus like a thought issue. That was a big epiphany for me personally. So that's sensory kit ideas right there. So a couple of things that can be really helpful, right? Noise canceling headphones. That's a pretty big one. Highly recommend those if you're working in an office. Some kind of fidget toys, right? These can be sensory soothing. They're just fun. You get to buy toys as an adult. It's pretty cool, right? Stress balls, things like that. Mindfulness and deep breathing can be helpful. It really can. And there are some people with ADHD or OCD like myself where meditation, I get way too in my thoughts and I actually feel worse. So I have to do something more movement based than just sit with my thoughts. And so there's some studies showing some people with ADHD do really well with meditation, and some people they actually feel worse after. So don't beat yourself up if feeling your breath feels triggering, especially if you've had trauma stuff. Paying attention to your breath and getting in your body sometimes can be dysregulating. Interesting, right? And I get it. And then you could go for a walk, right? You could rock back and forth, use a weighted blanket. There's a lot of things that you could have in the office. So that's another one. And we're going to get into the environment itself. I want to talk to you about colors and things that help with that. So I've got a couple more things on this. Another one is that people will create a sensory downtime. So they'll actually put that in their schedule. So before we get to what color to paint the walls, right? In your day, if you have a break, you might have a couple slots of sensory regulation where you're either calming it down or you're understimulating and you're revving it up. You're going for a walk. You're grabbing a fidget toy. So putting a time to kind of check in with where you're at sensory wise to regulate, even if it's 5 minutes, can actually make your day way more effective, because instead of just blocking it out and try to be productive, you're actually taking time to pause, see where you're at, regulating, getting to baseline, and then boom, versus just forcing yourself and, trying to push through. I'm going to talk about, this is really cool. This is from a website. They do different types of like therapy and occupational therapy. And this is what they talk about with creating a sensory friendly space. So when we're creating a sensory friendly space, so now we're going to shift to, like, let's say your office, right? Or your bedroom, or you might even have a space in your house that's designated as a little sensory spot if you need that. So when we're looking at that, we're going to cater to all of the 8 senses. So sight, hearing, taste, touch, smell, movement, balance, and then proprioception. So what do I mean by that? So sight, right? We're going to use colors and different visuals, whether that's no clutter at all, or you love, like, there's minimalist and then there's maximalist, and that's kind of cool. I'm going to Google it and we'll see what comes up. All right, so look at maximalist design. This is what I'm talking about, right? There's that whole movement of like minimalism and having the least amount of stuff. And then there's been an opposite movement. It's like, oh my gosh, what if I had everything I loved around me, but it was organized, and this is neat too. So instead of it just being like this hotel room, you just have everything you love and funky stuff. And so this, depending on your profile, you might be somebody that, look at this. You might be somebody that, like, is chronically understimulated, right? You're always bored. And this might be more of a style for you. Or you might be somebody that's always overstimulated, and then you might go for something more, simple. So maximalist design is a pretty cool thing. Like, how this is cool, right? If you had a friend, you went to their house, wouldn't you just look around and be like, oh, this is so cool? So just depending on your profile, that's pretty neat. Okay, so we're looking at sight, right? Hearing, so we're going to minimize noise levels. You might put acoustic treatments on your office. You can get them on Amazon. They're noise, like, buffering pads that you can put on the walls. You might have quiet zones. Taste, you might have food options or tea, right? So if some of your stimming or your sensory needs is oral, you might have tea. Like, if you don't want to do a bunch of calories or sugar or something, you might have that. You might have cool drinks that you can make. Like, you might take, like, just plain soda water and put in sugar-free mixes or sugar mixes, whatever you want to do, and do stuff like that. But just having sugar-free candy or sugar candy, again, I'm not saying you should go for low calorie. It just depends, right? So taste is kind of interesting. And then touch, like sensory friendly fabrics. What is that called? I know other people have this sensory aversion. Microfiber. If you touch that, you touch microfiber, like it kind of sticks on your hands. Anybody know what I'm talking about? There's like certain fabrics that are like, a lot of us are like, bleh. So pay attention to fabrics. That can be something as well. Soft fabrics, textured surfaces, sensory toys, smell, right? Being aware of unscented or scented products, or maybe you love the smell. And then if you really want, you could do like a swing in your office. You could have a climbing wall. You could have exercise balls. You could have a balance beam. And by the way, balance, they've shown, can help with ADHD because it's related to part of our brain that regulates executive function. So balance. So that's nice. Seating, right? So having ergonomic chairs that are really comfortable, or furniture. And then the last one is proprioception. So elements that provide pressure input, and that's weighted blankets, compression clothing. You can do compression socks. You could have that can actually, that deep pressure, it's also considered deep pressure therapy, and actually help. So it promotes a sense of calm. Okay, so I want to show you this is kind of cool, the color choices. This is neat. So black. So here's some color choices. Black is an air of mystery. That, I don't know if anybody has their walls painted black, but that's kind of neat. White. This is what the colors mean. Blue is soothing, promotes a sense of relaxation. Green, refreshing, cool, nature, right? That might be stimulating your own way. And so you can see each color kind of does different things. And I'm curious, your favorite color might be something that really would be really neat to have a lot in your office because it makes us happy, you know? So if whatever your favorite color is, have that in your mind, right? And look around your office or wherever you're seating. If you don't see that color around, maybe that would be a cool thing to do. You know, it just depends. So these are some of the colors that you could do. And we really want a space that represents you and is fun. So those are some of the colors. All right, let me see. And then lighting. Okay, so lighting's a thing. Is anybody like the overhead light versus lamps? If you don't have a lamp in your office and you're sensitive to light, get a lamp. My goodness, that could be a really great thing. Have a lamp so you're not doing the overhead because that can be overwhelming unless you don't mind it. So dim the lights, reduce the noise if you need that. You could have a walking, like a stand-up desk that can be really helpful as well. So lots of cool stuff. And there's just so many benefits to doing something like this. And again, the sound can be a big one for everybody. So just really, really watch that. So again, just remember too that we are exposed to high stimulation environments like every day in real estate all the time. It's always changing, which is why it's such a good career for us. So if you get overstimulated, don't beat yourself up because it might even be that your sensory needs are not that different than a neurotypical sometimes, but because we're in this environment, we need it. We really need it. We've got constant phone notifications, right? Texts, app pings. So if you can turn your phone notifications on silent, right? Or just have a visual. And this is just some of the real estate specific stuff I want to end with. That's a huge one, right? So you're not task switching constantly. You're not having ping, 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 right? Going on. So put on like do not disturb anytime you're wanting to focus, because otherwise you're just setting yourself up for failure. Your desk baskets are really helpful. So if you've got clutter on your desk and you have decision paralysis of this has to go in here and I have to just get a basket and put it in the basket and get off your desk, and you can sort through the basket later. And don't do the thing that I've done in the past, which I'm not going to move this off the desk because it's going to force me to do it. You know, anybody done something like that? Well, I'm not gonna pull these clothes off the bed because that means I have to put the clothes away before I go to bed, and then you end up just like moving them off again anyway, straight, or you leave everything on the desk. If it passes a certain threshold where it's left there for a couple of days, put that stuff in a basket for now. Just get out of your space. So yeah, those notifications, texts, if you can do that. And then remember too, speaking of environment, with transitions. So task switching and transitions can be a little bit more difficult for us. And that means switching from work mode to personal mode, right? Personal mode, now back into work mode. And so some people use their car and have certain things that they do in their car to transition, or certain sensory soothers before they go. Like they might sit in their car, right? The office, the work is really stimulating, and then you get home and your family's all calm and you're buzzing, right? And it's hard to connect. It takes you a while to come down. So it might be that you sit in the car and you do a couple sensory soothing stuff. So when you walk into home, you can connect with your family or whatever your situation or your friends a lot sooner. And then when we talk about environments, a visual timer, a visual clock. Remember, a lot of us have time blindness, so we have trouble gauging time, like how long it's been, which is a gift because we're super present and our brain isn't constantly calculating time in the same way as a neurotypical person. So put visuals around so you're not having to like check your phone over and oh, now there's a notification, now I'm off on something else, right? So if you can get an old school clock, that can be really, really helpful as well. White noise machine, watch your clothing, right? Pay attention to that. Essential oils, like you can have essential oil diffuser. That's a really fun one that can happen as well. And then your sensory kit. If there's certain sensory soothers, bring it with you to open houses. And I'm going to add something in that may or may not fit, but snacks. So we can forget to eat. So in your sensory kit as an add-on, put some kind of granola bar or just nuts or something in there. Because is there anybody here that's like forgot to eat? You realize and you're going to a showing and you're yeah, everyone, right? Like everyone. So put snacks in your car, because instead of thinking I'm never gonna forget, think sometimes I might, right? And put it in the car, because that's gonna be really helpful. Put that in your sensory kit, because being really hungry can be overstimulating. So put that in there, and really it's going to depend on your sensory profile, right? And what works for you or not. And then a couple bonus things, right? Like binaural beats. I want to mention that again. If you go on like Apple Music or anything like that, you can go on there and they have binaural beats on your phone. Apple Music, Spotify, YouTube has it, and that can help your brain waves get into a focus mode. If I just can't focus and have to get something done, that is something that I go to where I'm like, okay, I have to do this. So that can be really helpful as well. So that's the majority of what I have for today. So again, we want to really, this is like, I don't know, for a lot of us as adults, what we've done to cope at this point is to numb this stuff out. And then now I'm telling you to unnumb it. I'm telling you to pay attention to your body, which can be a lot. Pay attention to your sensory needs, your triggers, because it's safe to do that now if it hasn't been before. It is safe now, and it's actually going to help you. So that numbing out of all of our stuff was a coping mechanism for a lot of us that worked before, right? It kept us, because we didn't have the words, we didn't have the control. But now that same coping mechanism that might have helped us exist in these environments before we had this knowledge, now it's not helping us in the same way. Maybe sometimes, but it's okay to drop coping mechanisms. But it's also okay to acknowledge that sometimes that feels really scary at first, especially if you've had it for so long. And so just FYI, like, you can talk to that, say, hey, thank you for getting me to this point. If it feels really resistant, and you can soften now. You can soften. I want to listen. So just throw that out there. There's some conversations I've had with myself and with the help of a therapist to kind of release this like tension of like, oh, I can't pay attention. I got to numb out. I got to be harsh with myself. I got to push myself. It's that balance. We still want to push ourselves. We just want to find a balance that's helpful. All right. We'll have a sensory soothing day. And we'll see you next week. And yeah, just care about you guys, and we'll talk soon. All right. Take care, everybody.